Ethan Reed, a seasoned paranormal investigator known for his fearless approach to the supernatural, received a peculiar call late at night. A man from the outskirts of town frantically described a house that appeared in an abandoned field overnight, a massive structure with no visible doors. The caller's voice trembled with fear as he mentioned strange noises and shadows around the house. Intrigued, Ethan contacted his team: Sarah, an empath capable of sensing energies, and Mark, a tech-savvy ghost hunter armed with state-of-the-art equipment. The three of them agreed to investigate first thing in the morning, despite an ominous feeling that crept into Ethan's mind. Before heading out, Ethan researched the area but found no records of the house ever existing. Determined to uncover the truth, they set out at dawn, their minds racing with anticipation and dread. As they arrived at the location, the sun barely pierced through the dense morning fog. The house stood in the middle of a barren field, an imposing Victorian-style mansion, completely out of place. Its windows were boarded up, but the lack of any door immediately caught their attention. The structure seemed ancient yet well preserved, as though frozen in time. Sarah gasped. "This house, it feels alive," she whispered, clutching her arms as though shielding herself from an invisible chill. Mark scanned the area with his equipment, noting a sudden spike in electromagnetic readings. Ethan's gaze lingered on the house. "Let's document everything before we get closer." The team circled the house, examining every inch. They found no entrances, no gates, and no paths leading up to it. Only a single, twisted tree stood nearby, its branches bare and claw-like. Mark used a thermal imaging camera to scan the walls, but the readings were strange. There were cold spots where there shouldn't be. Sarah closed her eyes, focusing her energy. "There's something trapped inside. It wants us to come closer," she murmured, her voice distant. Ethan hesitated but decided they needed to get inside. "Let's check the windows," he said, motioning for the team to follow. Ethan managed to pry open one of the boarded windows. Inside, the air was thick and musty, filled with the scent of decay. They climbed through, entering what appeared to be a grand hallway lined with old paintings. The paintings depicted people with hollow eyes and expressions of fear. Mark set up cameras in the corners, capturing every angle. Sarah stood still, eyes closed again, sensing the presence. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs. They weren't alone. "Something's coming," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. The air grew colder with each step they took. Ethan led the way cautiously, flashlight in hand, its beam flickering as if something was interfering. Sarah's breathing became shallow, her eyes darting around as if following something unseen. Mark trailed behind, recording everything with his night vision camera. As they moved deeper into the house, they heard faint whispers, growing louder with each passing second. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door behind them, trapping them inside. The house seemed to come alive, creaking and groaning as though it were breathing. "Stay close," Ethan whispered, his voice steady but tense. They pressed on, their footsteps echoing ominously in the cavernous space. They reached a massive, locked door, ironically, the only door they had encountered in the entire house. It was covered in strange carvings and symbols, glowing faintly. Sarah touched the door and gasped, pulling her hand back as if burned. "It's not just a door," she whispered. "It's a seal." Mark scanned the door with his EMF reader, which went haywire. Ethan examined the carvings closely, recognizing some as protection symbols. They realized the house wasn't just trapping them, it was containing something far more sinister. "We need to leave," Sarah urged, her voice shaking. Suddenly, A loud bang echoed through the house, and the floor began to vibrate. The walls pulsed, and shadows started to gather, forming a dark, humanoid figure in the center of the room. It had no face, only hollow voids where eyes should be. The temperature plummeted, and the team's breath became visible in the cold air. The entity moved towards them slowly, its presence suffocating. Sarah tried to communicate, reaching out with her empathic abilities. "It's angry," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's trapped. It wants freedom." Ethan took a deep breath. "We need to find a way to banish it or free it safely," he said, determined. Ethan remembered an old cleansing ritual taught by a mentor. They needed to draw a circle of protection and chant an incantation. Mark quickly set up candles from their kit, forming a protective boundary. Sarah began the chant, her voice growing stronger with each repetition. The entity screamed, a sound that echoed through their very bones. The house shook violently, but the team held their ground. As the ritual reached its climax, the entity dissipated into a blinding light, leaving behind a profound silence. The house began to decay rapidly, walls crumbling and the roof collapsing. They barely made it out in time, watching as the structure imploded, leaving only an empty field behind. Once outside, Sarah noticed something glowing in the grass. It was a small locket, engraved with the same symbols from the door. Inside was a photo of a woman from the early 1900s. They realized she had been trapped in the house, her spirit finally freed. Ethan pocketed the locket as a reminder of the power of the unknown. "We did good today," he said softly. The team drove away, the sun rising behind them, casting a golden light over the now empty field. As the team drove back to the city, the tension began to ease. The morning sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the darkness they had just escaped. Ethan glanced at Sarah, who was silently gazing out of the window, lost in thought. Mark, sitting in the back seat, reviewed the footage he had captured, each frame a testament to the horrors they had encountered. "We should tell someone about this," Mark suggested, breaking the silence. "People need to know what happened there." Ethan nodded but remained quiet. He was contemplating something deeper, a nagging thought that wouldn't leave him alone. The locket in his pocket felt heavier than it should, as if it carried more than just its physical weight. Suddenly, Sarah spoke. The house wasn't just haunted. Weeks later, Ethan sat in his study, researching the symbols from the locket. Books and old manuscripts were scattered across the desk. He discovered that the symbols belonged to an ancient protective order, one tasked with sealing away dangerous forces. The woman in the locket, Eleanor Blackwood, had been a member of this order. Her spirit had remained trapped in the house to guard the entity, ensuring it wouldn't escape. By performing the ritual, the team had not only freed Eleanor but also dismantled the house's containment spell. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Had they truly done the right thing? Or had they unleashed something far worse? His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. Ethan, Sarah, and Mark met again, this time in a small cafe. They discussed their experiences and the strange dreams Sarah had been having. Dreams of the house, the entity, and Eleanor Blackwood. "We might have disrupted something," Ethan admitted. "But we need to be sure." Mark suggested they visit Eleanor's grave, hoping it would provide some closure. The cemetery was old and overgrown, a fitting place for someone who had spent her life guarding secrets. They found her grave, marked with the same symbols as the locket. As they stood in silence, a soft breeze rustled the leaves. Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. "She's at rest now," she said quietly. But Ethan wasn't convinced. He couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. Several weeks after visiting Eleanor Blackwood's grave, Ethan found himself once again drawn to the locket. He felt an unexplainable urge to return to the site of the house, which had mysteriously vanished after the ritual. Sarah and Mark were reluctant but agreed to accompany him. The three of them, armed with their gear and a deep sense of caution, headed back to the remote forest. As they approached the area, a dense fog began to settle in, obscuring the path ahead. The once familiar clearing was now just an empty patch of land. The house was gone, but the energy was still palpable. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the locket around his neck, feeling its warmth against his skin. Sarah shivered. "I don't like this. It feels unfinished." Without hesitation, Ethan stepped toward the portal. Sarah grabbed his arm. "Are you insane? We don't know what's on the other side." "We didn't finish what we started," Ethan replied. "If we don't go, this might never end." Mark hesitated but eventually nodded. "We're in this together." The trio stepped through the portal, finding themselves in a realm that defied explanation. The sky was a swirling mass of colors, and the ground beneath them glowed with an otherworldly light. Shadows moved in the distance, figures that seemed to watch their every move. A voice echoed through the air, soft, melodic, and familiar. "Thank you for freeing me." Eleanor Blackwood appeared before them, her form radiant and serene. She explained that the house had been a prison not only for her but for countless souls trapped by the malevolent entity. By unlocking the locket and performing the ritual, they had allowed her to guide these souls to peace. Eleanor guided Ethan to a massive stone altar, inscribed with ancient symbols similar to those on the locket. She explained that activating the altar would permanently close the portal but required a sacrifice. Someone had to remain behind to complete the ritual. Sarah and Mark protested, but Ethan knew what had to be done. "This was my journey from the start. I'll finish it." He placed the locket on the altar and began chanting the words Eleanor taught him. The ground shook violently as the portal began to collapse. Eleanor placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You will not be alone," she whispered. "Your spirit will guide others, just as I guided you." With a final flash of light, the portal closed, leaving Sarah and Mark back in the clearing, alone. Months later, Sarah and Mark visited a memorial they had built for Ethan near the clearing. A plaque bore his name and the inscription, "A guardian of light and shadow." As they stood in silence, a gentle breeze rustled the trees. Sarah felt a familiar presence and smiled. "He's still with us," she whispered. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. "And always will be." As they walked away, the forest seemed more peaceful, as if it too acknowledged the sacrifice made.